Welcome to another Cuke audio phone chat. I'm DC Puba of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Dogette Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable and free from economic hardship and able to get out and do whatever you wish within the confines of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. Today's phone chat is with Bill Porter, known by his pen name Red Pine. He's translated many Chinese Buddhist and Taoist texts and poetry, and wrote a wonderful book on Chinese Hermits that he searched out and found in China, and a book on going up the Yellow River, and another one about taking a route into Pakistan. He's got an interesting life, and he's going to talk about it. Katrinka and I are friends with Bill. I met him through Andy Ferguson. We mentioned that a little, who's another Chinese translator. And he's friends with Silas Hoadley. He lives in Port Townsend, where Silas Hoadley lives. And Silas is an old, one of Suzuki's, Shunryu Suzuki's key disciples. I keep tabs on Silas with Bill. Silas has, he's been disappearing a little over the last few years. And I was calling Bill. I was having trouble connecting with Silas, and Bill was helping me. And that's why I called him. And then we talked a little bit, and I said, hey, can I record you? And he said, sure. And, you know, what do you want to know? And anyway, just went from there. I did get hold of Silas, and what he said is, he said, what did he say? Something like his lights are twinkling out. But we had a nice talk. We talked for an hour. It was really good. I really appreciated it. And he's a little unclear on some things, but, you know, we connected, and you know, he asked how different people were doing. I got a nice email from his daughter Amber, who said he really enjoyed our talk. So after a pause to meditate, we'll go straight into Bill. And I think you'll find he's got a lot of interesting things to say. Interesting life. And he's done quite well for himself and for us. I want to oh, you know, he won a prize. I was just reading his Wikipedia page. He won the 2018, he won the American Academy of Arts and Letters Thornton Wilder Prize for Translation. My impression of Bill's translation, and also of Andy Ferguson's, is that it's very high quality translations from people who really understand the language. And I don't know how much, but it seems like quite a bit. Like a lot of the translations we get of you know, Chinese and Japanese texts that are coming from popular writers who don't really know the language, but are looking at other translations, maybe talking to somebody who speaks the language. Bill speaks Chinese quite well, understands it quite deeply. And I've talked to him about, you know, when he was working on some translation, and he was dealing with current Chinese scholars in Chinese, talking about fine points of the translation and the meaning, because there's so many layers of meaning. And so you really get in-depth, thoughtful translation and commentary from him Richard Baker just absolutely loves his book on the Heart Sutra, and he did a book on the Diamond Sutra too, not only with translations but with commentary. All right, so here we go. After pause to meditate, we'll go straight into Bill. So when you hear the bell, you can hit pause or not, and meditate or not. If you don't hit pause, you will have a very brief little moment for meditation. And then when you're through, if you have hit pause, you can hit unpause, and we'll hit the bell to end meditation. And we will have all meditated together and come out at the same time.
I have nothing better to do. I'm just sitting here working on a translation of Huang Bo, a Chinese Zen master who lived in the 9th century.
Oh, yeah? Well, tell us about it.
Well, about 2 months ago, Jack Shoemaker, the publisher who runs Counterpoint, who Gary Snyder introduced me to back in the 80s. He's been publishing all my Buddhist books, and he approached me about a project because he started publishing about 6 months ago. He started publishing a little 4x6 pocket book, something you could actually put in a shirt pocket.
Yeah.
And he started with something by Gertrude Stein called Lifting Belly, and then he continued with something by Wendell Berry called Think Little, and then Gary Snyder with Tawny Grammar, and keeping it to less than 100 pages, more or less. And so he suggested publishing putting the Heart Sutra and the Diamond Sutra together in one of these things. And I got my files out and formatted for the 4x6 format. And I said, well, that'll only be about 60 pages, so maybe we can add something more. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, what about the platform? So I added the platform, and it came to about 120 pages or so. And so he's thinking of publishing that about a year from now, I guess. But that just got me thinking, and then I started messing around because I've been publishing with Empty Bowl Press, a nonprofit, a local press here that publishes poetry, almost all poetry. Mm-hmm. And they've published my ox herding book 40 years ago.
Oh my goodness!
Anyway, I started publishing a series of chapbooks with them about 2 years ago.
What's that?
Keeping them to a chapbook, something that's a chapbook used to be something that's saddle stitched or stapled, and it's usually 5x7, a small little book, a booklet.
Yeah,
something about 60 pages or so. So I published 7 chapbooks with Empty Bowl in the last 2 years, less than 2 years, and things like a new translation of the Diamond Sutra, together with the sutra that came before the Diamond that no one had ever translated before, and then of course,
what's it called? The one that no one had never translated.
Well, I gave it a name. I called it the Empty Bowl Sutra.
Oh, and nice.
The Diamond Sutra is is part of a larger sutra, a huge sutra called the Maha Prajnaparamita Sutra, in which there are 16 different sutras.
Yeah.
And the Diamond Sutra is number 9, but nobody had ever translated number 8. And 8 sets up the diamond. It's sort of like the straight man to the diamond. And so I translated both the empty bowl and the diamond and published them about a year and a half ago with Empty Bowl, and called it A Day in the Life, because the sutras complement each other. It's as if the Buddha, the first one's about Manjushri going into town for begging, and the diamond is about the Buddha coming back from begging and then speaking the Diamond Sutra. So they're very complementary. Anyway, so I published a new translation of the diamond, and I also published the third patriarch's Trusting in the Mind, because nobody has ever translated that before according to the Tang Dynasty rhyme scheme. Because the problem with things like texts like the diamonds, the Trusting in the Mind is that it's a poem, but when you read it in Chinese, it no longer rhymes in modern pronunciation. And so the tendency, the universal solution for everybody has always been just to turn it into quatrains, four couplets, and then that's a poem. Well, that's actually, according to the Tang Dynasty pronunciation, that's wrong. It's not quatrains. I mean, sometimes it is, but sometimes it's other units, literary, poetic units. And so I discovered there are these compendiums that reveal, that were published in the Tang Dynasty with the pronunciation of the time. So anyway, I reconstructed the rhyme scheme and published it with Empty Bowl, calling it Trusting the Mind. And so I published Yongjia's Song of Enlightenment a couple of months ago, and so I had these things laying around, that I published as chapbooks with very limited distribution, and so I got to thinking, and so I decided I will publish something. About 100 years ago or so, Suzuki published something called, I think, the Manual of Zen, or what was it called? The Manual of Zen Buddhism. And I thought, well, why don't I do that? And so that's what I'm working on now. I'm publishing this with Empty Bowl, this probably right before Christmas. I don't know what I'll call it, probably Zen Sutras and Texts, something like that. It'll have the Heart Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, my new translation of the Diamond Sutra. It'll also have some new translations of sections of the Lankavatara. It'll have Bodhidharma's outline of practice. Also, the Third Patriarch's Trusting the Mind. It'll have the Platform Sutra. It'll have the Yongjia Song of Enlightenment and Huangbo's Transmission of the Mind. So that's what I'm working on right now, and I've always wanted to put together something small. This won't be in the 4x6 format that Jack is doing, because it'd be too unwieldy. And I always liked books that when you open them, they don't want to close, that you can lay them flat.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to publish this as a 5x7, a small format book, and have it Smythe sewn so that it lies flat with a cloth cover. And I'm even going to put a ribbon in it. I've always wanted to have a book with a ribbon.
Where does the ribbon
go?
Well,
the ribbon just is attached to the binding and comes out and around.
Oh,
and
yeah,
through
right.
The pages.
Like some of the old Bibles had that.
Yeah, exactly. So people can know where their place is if they want to go back to the same page.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I finally decided to put together this anthology, and so Jack had this idea to do a little pocket book, and I've just expanded it now into it'll be about 250 pages, but it'll be 5x7, so rather small. People can carry it around and give it a nice cloth binding, so a cloth cover, so it wears well, and like I say, a ribbon.
Yeah,
it's my goal in life right now.
That I don't think I've seen ribbons in books. My memory of it is my father had some books like New Thought Christianity books that were sort of like little Bibles with those ribbons. Yeah, neat.
Yeah, I always wanted to publish a book with a ribbon. That's my again.
Cool.
Finally, now that I'm getting old, I get to do what I want.
Yeah. How old are you?
76.
76. You're
Not
1 year
really.
older than me. Yeah.
And yeah. I mean, it's old and not old. You know what I mean? It's as long as you're not sick, you're not really old.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Well, once you get a serious illness, then of course you get old fast. But I haven't hit that kind of illness yet, so I'm
Yeah.
still doing pretty much what I've always done, just sitting around, translating, drinking a bunch of tea.
Uh, what type of tea?
Well, generally Taiwan tea. I drink a lot of oolong, different kinds of oolong tea in the
Yeah.
afternoon, but in the morning I always have black tea, what the Chinese call red tea. It has more caffeine, and I need caffeine in the morning. But I don't like coffee. It's very different.
Yeah.
Has a different reaction on my body.
Same with me.
Except I'll have sometimes a coffee at dinner. Sometimes, when I'm trying to cleanse my palate.
Uh-huh. Wow.
After some cherry pie, perhaps.
Oh goodness. Do you ever drink pu'er tea?
Not so much. It's not. I know it's rather popular, but no, I don't drink much pu'er. I'm given a lot, so I give away a lot.
Oh,
But
hey, save some for me.
but anyway, no, I've never been a fan of pu'er. Haven't caught the bug yet. If I had a stomach illness, it's supposed to be really good.
You'll save money that way.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, yeah, black tea in the morning, oolong in the afternoon, whiskey at night.
Oh, wow, that sounds very good. I can't do that last one. It's prohibited. um, well, can you tell me how did you get into all this? Where did it start?
When did what start?
You getting into being interested in Buddhism and translating, and what does it go back to?
I don't know how far. Let's see. I guess I'd been interested in Buddhism. I'm not sure when exactly, but when I was drafted in the Army, and I had they give you these dog tags, and you have to specify your religion and have it stamped on your dog tag. So if they find you on the battlefield, they'll know what kind of chaplain to call to perform the service.
Oh, that's nice of them.
So I told them I was a Buddhist, but I really didn't know anything about Buddhism. But I was also ornery, so being a Buddhist was also sort of cool, or saying I was. And I read a few books, some things that Kanzi had published, and some Theravadan books that I picked up, but it didn't amount to much until my senior year at Santa Barbara. I was reading The Way of Zen by Alan Watts, and I thought this really made a lot of sense. And I'd been pursuing a parallel path, but by studying things like statistics, computer. This was in 1969. And 69 and 70. 1970 is when I read Alan Watts's book. Now it's just.
You were in college in 1970?
Yeah. Well, I was a freshman in 1961, but I flunked out of Santa Barbara, and then the next year I flunked out of Palomar College down by Escondido, and then the next year I flunked out of Pasadena City College in 64. And so I was drafted that spring in '64, and I went into the Army for 3 years because.
Well, tell me what happened. Tell me just briefly what was your Army experience?
Well, it was a good one. but not. It had a rough beginning because, of course, when you go into the Army, the idea is to treat you like dirt, so you'll just get used to being ordered around and doing whatever people say.
Yeah.
But they sent me after basic training at Fort Ord. They sent me to Fort Benning in Georgia to be a Jeep mechanic. And a week before we were, and when I went in the Army in '64, when you're drafted, you spend 2 years.
Yeah.
But they had a program then that if you're willing to extend for one more year, that is to go in the Army for 3 years, you could be guaranteed any training you wanted that they had available or any duty assignment. And so I signed up for 3 years in Germany.
Oh, yeah, good idea. You're smart. Did you know about what was happening in Vietnam then?
Actually, not that much, but I had a German girlfriend.
Yeah.
And she was thinking of going back to Germany. And so I signed up for Germany. And a week before we were supposed to graduate from Jeep school, they came in the barracks and told us, guess what? Next week you're all graduating, and we're sending the entire graduating class to Vietnam. And I said, just a minute. I have a special deal. And they said, son, this is the Army. We'll send you wherever we want to. So me and this other and believe it or not, when they told us that they were sending us to Vietnam, everybody cheered. They were going to kill gooks.
Well, but what year was that?
It was '64.
Oh, it was '64. There was the Vietnam War was hardly even thought of in America.
Really. Well, yeah, definitely not in March. In the spring, or it was actually the summer when I was in Fort Benning. Anyway, me and this other kid who didn't want to go to Vietnam went AWOL the next day. We put on our uniform and took a bus. We got our pay. Our pay was $66 a month. We got our $66, put on our dress uniforms, took a bus into Atlanta, and flew for free back to L.A. Because in those days, if you had your uniform on and there was space available, you flew for free. So we flew back to L.A. and I left $300 with a friend of mine. And so we got the $300, and I bought a '54 Chevy convertible, and we started driving up 395 because I'd grown up outside of Coeur d'Alene, near Spokane, Washington.
Oh, yeah.
And I was gonna go see this girlfriend, not the German one, but the one who preceded the German girl. And so we didn't know what we were going to do. We just didn't want to go to Vietnam. This kid was a musician. He was going to teach me how to play the saxophone, and we were going to form a jazz combo back in Boston. I was only 20 years old, and of course.
Let me ask you one thing. Did you have any idea that it might be dangerous in Vietnam?
Not really.
Yeah.
Not. Well, there's one clue that sort of made. Yeah, there were some signs, but it wasn't really big in the news. It wasn't.
Right.
Anyway, that was part of it, but I just didn't want to. I made this deal to spend an extra year in the Army, so I didn't have to go to Vietnam.
Right.
So I figured they had broken their promise. So I went AWOL with this other kid, and we ended up. The car got in a wreck, and we did a bunch of hitchhiking, and then we started heading to Boston through Montana in August, and we got hit by a blizzard, and we were down to $5. So I just gave the $5 to this kid. I've never seen him since then, named Jim. So Jim kept hitchhiking, and I walked into the next town and turned myself in.
Oh.
And spent a week in jail in Miles City, Montana. And then since I turned myself in, the Army didn't send anybody to pick me up. They just sent me the train ticket back to Seattle, and then they flew me back to Georgia, and I had to go back to the Fort Benning and tell the sergeant major He said, "Why did you go AWOL?" And I said, "Because I thought I had a deal with the Army." And he said, "Son, you did have a deal with the Army. You're not going to Vietnam. We're going to send you to clerk school. Since you didn't finish jeep school, we'll make you a clerk." And so they sent me to clerk school and sent me to Germany.
Huh. Well, that worked well, huh?
It did. The gods were looking out for me. They wanted to take care of me somehow. And I had a great time in Germany because it was sort of that transition, in your life when you really don't know what the hell you want to do. I'd flunked out of 3 colleges.
Uh-huh.
I was interested in things, but I didn't really want to work for a living or anything. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So the Army was a perfect time for me to just spend a few years doing not much of anything, and messing around in Germany and Europe. Was in 64 to 67 was really a good time to be there.
Oh yeah.
I always thought, as a result, I loved Germany. I was going to make my future there, I thought. And so after I got out of the Army, I went back to Santa Barbara, and I did really well because I sort of had a focus then. And I did so well, I qualified for their year abroad program. So I went to Germany to Göttingen to study anthropology at Göttingen. It's a university.
Whose program?
Santa Barbara's, the University of California. Actually, it was the University of California. So even though I flunked out of Santa Barbara my first year, when I came back for this second year, I became a Regent Scholar. I got a scholarship, $5,000 a year. It was, and money, and I qualified for this year abroad program. So I went to Göttingen for a year and studied statistics.
Did you see the old girlfriend? What about your old girlfriend? Your old German
No.
girlfriend?
It turns out, well, I visited her parents soon after I got to Germany in '64, and they were very embarrassed to say, "Well, our girlfriend's married somebody else, or our daughter's been married to someone else." So that didn't work out. But anyway, when I went back to Germany as a student, in studying anthropology, I had a couple of interesting. One of the classes was there's me and one other student. Every week we would go out to the soccer pitch, and we would play with all the things Captain Cook brought back from his trips around the world. It turns out Cook's ancestors were Germans, and so after he died, his entire collection was sent to Göttingen. And so
Wait a minute.
One of my classes was just,
you said you went to the what?
There's a university in northern Germany outside the town.
Yeah,
of
it sounded
Hanover.
like you said soccer pitch or something.
Yeah, I said soccer pitch. Where people play soccer.
And you go to this soccer pitch and there's Captain Cook stuff. It just doesn't.
Oh no, the professor would bring out different things, whether it's spears, boomerangs, because he would want us to use all of these things that Captain Cook brought back, and then we would have to describe them, measure them, and do what anthropologists do.
And why did you do this at a soccer pitch?
Because you needed a lot of space when you throw a boomerang.
Oh God, I had no idea you were going to throw a boomerang. Oh.
I didn't know that the class would include boomerangs and also spear throwers too. Where you have those little those wooden elbow things that you can throw a spear quite a distance with a good spear thrower. Anyway, but in addition to that class, I took a class in statistics, and Göttingen University was where statistics was invented by a couple of centuries ago by Frederick Gauss, who designed, came up with the idea of probability and the bell curve and all that sort of stuff.
What language were you studying in?
Oh, German. The classes were all in German.
Wow.
And I'd been in the Army in Germany for 2 years and picked up a little bit, and so and German is not a hard language. It's a very regular language. It doesn't do a lot of crazy things. Once you learn those simple rules,
got a lot of grammar.
It does, but that's an advantage because it has grammar. There are a lot of languages that are irregular, like English is one of them. Japanese the Japanese also has a lot of grammar too, though. Anyway, so I was taking this class.
I wouldn't say that.
Well, I won't speak about something I really don't know about. And Japanese is one of the things I don't know about. Anyway,
Yeah.
German has a lot of grammar. Once you pick up the rules, everything falls into place. And so I was taking this one class in statistics, and one of the things you do is you study correlations and design formulas to establish perfect correlations between variables. And so it was in the process of doing this that I came up with my first insight into the Dharma. Because when you design a correlation, what you're trying to do is write a formula that accounts for any movement on the x-axis is met with a corresponding movement on the y-axis. And so you're writing a formula that is you try to create a perfect correlation according to your formula. And it finally occurred to me one day, I said, well, to the extent that you can write a perfect correlation, you've only proven to yourself that you were mistaken in separating X and Y.
Mm-hmm.
And so all distinctions are arbitrary is the lesson. But I didn't really know what to do this until I came back to America next year and started reading some books about Buddhism and found out about the theoretical position, you might say, that corresponded to this in Buddhism. The teaching of emptiness, in a word. And so when I applied when I was a senior and I wanted to go to graduate school, I wanted to continue studying anthropology. I applied to Columbia, and they had a really great program with Margaret Mead, Ruth Benedict, wonderful department.
Wow, both.
So I applied. Both of them, and so I applied to Columbia, and they gave me a full fellowship there. So because I didn't have any money, I was getting I think I was getting $100 a month from the GI Bill, something like that.
Huh.
And so I went to Columbia. But there was the thing about it, when I applied to Columbia, there were all these fellowships that you could apply for. And there was a language fellowship, and you had to specify a rare language for an American in 1970. And I had been reading this book, Way of Zen, and had, made great sense. And there were these Chinese characters in it, and it was all about these people who lived a long time ago and spoke this other language. And so I just, on the fellowship, on the language fellowship, I wrote in the word Chinese, just on a whim. I really had no interest in China or anything, but I liked Zen. So they gave me this 4-year fellowship to go to get a PhD at Columbia. And
good Lord. Wait a minute. You're talking about PhD. You already have a master's?
No, I had just graduated. I was in the process of graduating from Santa Barbara.
Oh, you can go straight to PhD without getting a master's?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It happens. It didn't used to happen, I think, back, 50 years ago or 60 or whatever. But it's about the time I got this thing, that was the new standard. You don't bother with a master's. You just go straight to the PhD.
Oh, really? Huh.
And usually it was a 4-year deal, which is pretty much what usually a master's takes 2 years and a PhD takes another couple of years.
Well, it depends on what
years.
The subject is. Some of these
of course.
Science subjects, there'll be 10 years and stuff.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And a medical doctor, takes forever too, lawyers. Anyway, so but I felt a bit like a fraud because I didn't really have that much interest in China or Chinese, but it was just sort of a whimsical thing. And so
it's the best.
Before I went to Columbia, I went to Monterey Institute of Foreign Studies.
I went there
to spend this. Well, I studied in 1970. I spent the summer of '70 studying Chinese.
I was there 1969.
Oh, great!
Well, we just missed each other.
How about that?
Yeah.
Small world. Yeah, well, I really had a good time there. It was good that I did this because it gave me a basis.
Oh, yeah.
It introduced me to the Chinese. So when I got to Colombia, I didn't, I didn't sound like a fraud. But the problem with that is that because of this fellowship, it required me to take a special class called Intensive Chinese, which was 5 days. I know exactly. It was 5 days a week. It was 3 hours a day for 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And it was taught by a woman called Loretta Pond, but nobody called Loretta Pond. They called her the Dragon Lady. We started with 24 students in the class, and within a month we were down to 4.
Wow.
And she asked me to stay after class one day and said, "Mr. Porter, I only teach the best, and you're not one of them. I want you to drop the class." And so I said, I said, I can't. I said, my fellowship requires me to take this class. I can't drop it. She says, well, I'm not talking to you anymore. And so I would attend class, and she wouldn't even talk to me. I was like a ghost. So finally, I had to get the department chairman, Hans Bielenstein, to intercede on my behalf. And she began including me in the class discussions, but she got even with me by giving me a D for the class, which canceled my fellowship. So when that happened, I had to take a special exam. You can challenge a class, if you disagree with the grade, or if you want to.
She sounds
get
mean.
Credit. She was terrible. She was terrible. Like I said, we started with 24, and the 3 people she wanted to keep in the class, 2 of them had been sent there by the CIA. They were there because they were special. They specialized in Laotian, and they also wanted to get some background in Chinese because we were bombing in Cambodia then. And anyway, it was a terrible experience. My first year in Chinese, it was very painful, and I only withstood it because I'm just stubborn somehow. I didn't know where this was going to lead, but in the course of being at Columbia, though, I met a Chinese monk who had a little temple up he had a little temple in in Chinatown, but also one up the Hudson and in the countryside. And he had there's usually about 30-40 Chinese people from New York would go up there and spend a weekend with him. And so I started spending weekends with this Chinese master who spoke no English, and my Chinese was very rudimentary, and because we didn't study really conversation
really
much at Columbia. No, we weren't doing that. And so I became more and more interested in meditation and Buddhism. And so at the end of my second year at Columbia, I told the department chairman that I was withdrawing. I was leaving. And so I gave back the 2 years of the fellowship I hadn't used. They were able to give to someone else. And I went to Taiwan to live in a monastery.
Oh, is that right?
What
year?
Yeah, that was 1972. And I went down the first the monastery that I met. One of my fellow grad students at Columbia had passed through Taiwan and had stopped at this monastery, and so he had the address. So I couldn't go to Japan. I couldn't go to Japan, which most Westerners would have done in Western Buddhism, because I didn't know any Japanese. I'd been studying Chinese, and I couldn't go to China because it was the Cultural Revolution.
Oh,
and so Taiwan was the obvious choice for me. So I went to this monastery down in southern Taiwan, and it was just like leaving the planet, going to another world. And it was a Chinese temple, and so it was basically a Pure Land temple. I mean, they were very much into chanting and prostrations and stuff, and they almost never sat in meditation. And I was sort of looking for something more like Zen. So I put in a year there, and it helped me improve my Chinese stuff. But I had a sponsor. In order to stay in Taiwan, you had to have a sponsor. So this woman who was a sponsor suggested, well, I should go to a Chinese college for a year and to really improve my Chinese, because at monasteries you don't speak that much.
Yeah.
So I went to this monastery was at the southern end of Taiwan. It was called Foguangshan. Very famous monastery nowadays. I went to this college called Huagang Wenhua Shuiyuan, the culture college, Chinese culture college, and I took classes there. One of which was incidentally taught by a professor who had studied with Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead at Harvard, and so I was there for the Whitehead semester. And there was a girl who sat behind me in that class who eventually became my wife. So that was in 1973. Fall of 1973 we met, and it took me 7 years to convince her parents that we could get married, and we've been married 40 years this year. Anyway, but after 1 year at the university, at this college, I decided, well, I really didn't come to Taiwan to study, especially not at a college. So my sponsor again arranged for me to stay at this Zen temple, taught by the abbot was the head of the Zen sect in Taiwan, the Rinzai Zen sect, also head of the Taiwan Buddhist Association. So he had a lot of pull, and he gave me my own room there, and I spent about 2.5 years with him at that temple, and he would give me things from time to time, and I would start reading these Zen texts, and then and I got into developed the practice of translating as a way to improve my Chinese. Mm-hmm. And so that's how it started. You want to know how it started? By being in that monastery and having nothing better to do than meditate, take walks, and translate. So I just started doing it as a practice to improve my Chinese. But then I discovered I really love to translate. And the experience of doing that, it's like sitting with the Buddha, or a Zen master, rather than listening outside the window, but sitting inside next to the Buddha. But after, even though life at the monastery was great, I do miss it. It's a wonderful experience if you don't mind that kind of experience. But I didn't want the abbot really wanted to be a monk, and he told me so. He says, you've been here a couple of years now, you really should be a monk. And I decided, well, yeah, I didn't really want to be a monk. I've never really, I have a problem with authority, and so I left, and I lived in this farming village for 14 years outside of Taipei, way up on the mountain there, where it snows every year. A place called Bamboo Lake, and I rented 2 different farmhouses, lived there for 14 years, and eventually got married to this girl I'd met in the Whitehead class. We had 2 kids, and then I needed to make some money, so I started working for a radio station, an English language radio station that developed from the American military station that U.S. abandoned when we recognized China. And so I learned how to translate news, to do local news. I became a local journalist, and I just learned how to write. The neat thing about,
what year was that?
Oh, let's see. I started working at the radio station around 1980. Yeah, the year I got married. That's when I really needed a real job. So from 1980, I worked there for about 7 years. There was a couple breaks, but 7 years altogether. And the nice thing about the radio writing is you write for time. And so we were using those teletype machines, UPI, Reuters, and so the news director would watch a story coming across this, and he would wait till this piece of paper that is scrolling out of this machine. He'd wait usually till it's about 2 or 3 feet long. And they'd rip it off, and he'd hand it to me and say, "Hey, Porter, give me 15 seconds on this." And so you get an assignment where you're given a number of seconds, and you've got about 2 or 3 feet of text, and you look for the 15 seconds, and usually you'll first write it up, and we would maybe I would be 30 or 40 seconds the first time I'd write it up, and then I'd get rid of some adjectives and get rid of that phrase and this phrase and whatever. Anyway, the neat thing about radio writing is and I guess the same would be true of TV writing today, is you learn to write for time, so you learn how to edit. And so I developed a certain skill with being able to be succinct and direct. And then the boss eventually was asked to go over to Hong Kong to start a new radio station, and he took me with him to be his features editor. And so one of the people I had met in Taiwan, I had to do interviews with the son of the richest man in Taiwan, a man named Winston Wong. And I had quit the radio station in Taiwan to go find hermits in China. So I hadn't worked for about 2 years. And that's when I got the assignment to go to Hong Kong. But I wasn't sure that was going to happen. So I called up Winston and I said, me and my wife are going to go back to America. And there's one thing I wanted to do in China, and I've always wanted to do. He said, "What's that?" I said, "I'd like to explore the origins of Chinese culture." And I thought maybe a trip along the Yellow River, where Chinese civilization began, would be a really great way of understanding China better. So he said, "Well, how much money do you think I'll need, and how long will it take?" He says, "Well, I thought it would take about 3 months and about $9,000. He said, "Well, you want to come down and you want that in cash or traveler's checks?" So I went down, got the money, and then the next week, my boss said, "You want to come to Hong Kong with me?" I said, "Sure." And I've got an idea for a great radio feature. So I went to the mouth of the Yellow River, and I traveled to the source, and I produced 260 2-minute radio pieces, and people in Hong Kong loved it. And so I kept doing that. I went from Xi'an to Islamabad, did a Silk Road trip. I visited all the hill tribes down in the Southwest. Just did whatever I wanted to do, and so they were paying a lot of money in Hong Kong too. So after 2 years, I'd saved enough money, and so I moved back to America.
Hey, did your wife go with you?
Not to Hong Kong, no. She supported her parents in Taiwan.
Uh-huh.
And our kids also stayed with my wife. And then I came back in '93, and I brought our son here. And 3 or 4 years later, our daughter. My wife continued to stay in Taiwan to take care of her parents until they both died, and then moved here. So I've been here since '93. Like I say, I came back. I made enough money in Hong Kong so I could put a down payment on a house here in Port Townsend, and I've been here ever since. So that pretty much, is the story. And I've had the freedom to do what I want to do. Well, it's sort of like a freedom you have to be determined to grab a hold of.
Yeah.
Because it was really hard when I came back to America. I had no way to earn a living. I didn't have any skills.
What do you mean you didn't have any skills?
I had no marketable skills.
Well, something worked out.
I tried.
You knew Chinese.
Well, yeah, that was worthless. That meant nothing in those days. It was in 1993.
Yeah.
China was just then opening up. Anyway, so I decided to. I got a job, worked at a bakery for a few months. Then I worked waiting tables for about 6 months, and this whole time I wasn't able to do any translation work because I was so tired every day. So I finally decided I'm in America. I'll just give myself some credit cards. So I just started going into credit debt. Thinking, when you're trying to do books, you always think your book is so good, it's going to make so much money, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Every writer, and you sort of need that as a prod to work on a book. And so I was, doing these books. I published with Shoemaker or Copper Canyon, either poetry or Buddhist texts, and they never made anything. And so thank God they had the food stamp program in America was alive and well, and I got $300 a month. I never had to buy food. Food was free. I don't know what I would have done.
Hey, let me tell you something about that. I had a friend and benefactor who read in the acknowledgments of one of your books, you thanked the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, for the food stamps that helped support you while you were writing the book. And he said to me, David, you should consider getting food stamps too. And I did.
Yeah.
I got food stamps because of you through my friend John Sumser.
Oh, great. Well, I don't know what I would have done without them, because again, it was really. I decided I wasn't going to work in America after the first year. I was going to depend on the gods, but after a few years, I owed $32,000 in credit cards debt, and I had to put my house on the market. And before anybody made an offer, my aunt died and paid off my credit cards.
Well, that's very thoughtful of her.
Yeah, well, it sure was. She was my favorite aunt. In my bedroom right now, I got a picture of her right above my bed, Aunt Pearline. Anyway, so I took the house off the market and went back to translating. And a couple of years later, about 2 years, I owed $24,000 in credit card debt. And the Hong Kong government called me up. And they asked me if I would, because after the 97 turnover, they were having a hard time with tourism in Hong Kong. And my program on the radio was so popular, people would stop whatever they were doing to listen to it. It was a really popular program. It was 2 minutes, and I just would do this 2 minutes every day, move further along some trip that I was taking. So they asked me to come back and do 22-minute pieces for them, and I wanted to know how much I'd want for that. I said, well, I owe $24,000 on my credit cards. How much of that could you pay back? They said, we'll pay it all. And so I went the next week on a business class ticket, visited the 20 spots they wanted me to write about, came back, wrote the 2-minute spots, and paid off my credit cards once again. And then just about a year after that, some local people in Port Townsend asked me to, just when I was going to the end of credit card debt again, some local people asked me if I would take them to China, since I knew about China. And I wondered why I had never thought of that before. And so for the next, that was about 2001 or 2, something like that. And so for the next 15 years, whenever I needed money, I would take a small group of people, usually about 4 people, to China and pay off my credit cards with 1 or 2 trips a year. And that's why I've been able to continue doing that until, of course, recently, because my royalties in China right now, my royalties in America, I have 25 books right now in print in America, and I have never made more than $15,000 a year on those 25 books. I'm just assuming the average royalties and without the occasional advance, which knocks it up a little bit, just so temporarily. So I was still, marginally employed, you might say, self-employed in America, because the English language royalties just were nothing. And then the Chinese discovered me. It was about 5 years ago, the Chinese found out about my books. Of course, they weren't interested in the kind of the Buddhist books, and they weren't interested in the poetry I was translating. They were interested in what you'd call my travel-based books. And so they've become so popular. One of them has sold over 1 million copies.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Over 1 million, in fact, and Zen Baggage is around, I think it's around 300,000, 400,000 now. I get a wire transfer every month from my publisher of $10,000. Can you believe that?
Wow.
So I mean, I struggled in America where, again, I never made, say, an average of $2,000 a month ever from all of my books in America, and here I got 3 or 4. I got actually 9 books that have been translated back into Chinese, that are making me over 10,000 a month because the publisher's sort of stockpiling money over there, so you can just for the eventuality of the market disappearing. But even with this virus, book sales have done nothing but increase.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been drinking $15 wine lately.
Really? Oh my God. You've really come up in the world.
$15 wine.
Yeah.
I remember when I made the jump from $5 to $10. God, that was a difference. $10 wine was so good. But I'm telling you, $15 wine is even better.
That's great. That's great. Hey, I met you through Andy Ferguson. Back at Jeffrey's place, Jeffrey Hayden's place. I think the first time might not have been, but
it was outside it was south of Ukiah.
It was in Hopland.
There was a hot spring.
Hopland.
Yeah, Hopland. Yeah.
There was he had there was sort of a warm spring. It wasn't on his property, but we could walk to it, and that was really neat.
That's right. That's where we met.
And that was about God. What year? Maybe that was. It'd
be 99.
Really?
99 or 2000. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was living in Ukiah at the city of 10,000 Buddhas then.
Oh, right. And I visited you there. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember that now.
And Andy lived down in Petaluma, so he was able to drive up to Ukiah.
And he lived next door to, it still does, I think, to David Grissman.
Yeah. He used to play the mandolin for the Grateful Dead.
Oh yeah, David Grissman's great, man. I'm more of a David Grissman fan than a Dead fan. He's fantastic. And I can remember meeting him. I didn't meet him when he was next door to Andy's, I don't think. And I've been in the house, I think I met his wife. But back when he used to play, before he was well known, I'd talk to him in Point Reyes or Bolinas, when he played, because I'd go hear him. But how did you meet Andy?
He just drove up one day from Petaluma because he had heard, I don't know exactly how he heard I was at the city of 10,000 Buddhas, but he had heard that. Mm-hmm. He may have heard it from... Who's the abbot at the Berkeley Zen Center?
Mel Weitzman.
Yeah, Mel. Yeah. Well, Mel had asked me to come and give some talks on the Diamond Sutra. And I think maybe that's how Andy heard that I was in the Bay Area and found out I was up to the city of 10,000 Buddhas, and he just drove up one day and we became friends.
Yeah, that's neat. What was the first book you published in English?
Well, the first thing I published in English was something I self-published. Well, I published with Empty Bowl, called the Puming's Ox Herding Pictures and Verses, which I paid to have it published in Taiwan on with Chinese binding, string bound and that, and then sent a box of them over to America. And to appear to Port Townsend for the people at Empty Bowl to distribute, and I did a couple more. I did the Mountain Poems of Stonehouse, but also the same year I published the Ox Herding Pictures and Verses. I also published the poems of Cold Mountain with Copper Canyon Press here in Port Townsend. They were like an upcoming poetry press at that time in '83. Anyway, I started publishing these things with Empty Bowl, like I say, the Mountain Poems of Stonehouse, the Zen Teaching of Bodhidharma. And then I stopped for a while because then I had to work for a living. It wasn't until later in the 90s that I started to. Well, in '93, I published. In 1990, when I was just finishing my time at the radio station in '89, I applied to the Guggenheim Foundation to go to China to find hermits.
Oh,
And
yeah.
because
Tell about that.
I translated the poetry of these two hermits, Cold Mountain and Stonehouse. And so I wondered if people like that really existed and what it was like. So I applied to the Guggenheim Foundation, and then I was doing this interview again with Winston Wong, and I said, Winston, this might be one of my last interviews because I applied to the Guggenheim Foundation to go to China to find hermits. He said, that'd be a great idea. Well, if they don't give you the money, I will. And of course they didn't, and he did. So in March of '89, I went to China to look for hermits. I took a friend and he gave me enough money. I think it was like $5,000 to. So I called up my friend Steve Johnson here in Port Townsend, who was a photographer, and I said, "Oh, I'll tell you what, I'll pay for your ticket. If you come over and join me, we'll just go to China and see if we can't find some hermits." And so we went off to China without any idea where hermits were. But when I was in Beijing, this was in May. We arrived on May the 1st of 1989. Beijing was just full of protesters. Tiananmen was just jam-packed with people protesting. But I went to this one Buddhist monastery where the Buddhist Association was headquartered, and I met one of the senior monks there. His name was Jing Hui, and I asked him that, and he says, "Well, I think there's still some hermits in the Zhongnan Mountains." I didn't know where the Zhongnan Mountains were. I had to ask somebody else. And in Chinese, nouns aren't either singular or plural unless you somehow specify it. So I didn't know if it was one mountain or a bunch of mountains. And so eventually I went down and found out Zhongnan Mountains are south of Xi'an. So I went to Xi'an, and of course you weren't allowed to go. Westerner could not go into the mountains in China at all. But I hired a taxi to take me and Steve to the foot of the Zhongnan Mountains south of Xi'an, and asked her if she'd pick us up in a couple of days. Gave her some money, and we just took a trail, just because there's farmers around there, but the farmers all go into the mountains to gather herbs and stuff. And we just started hiking, and it took us about 2.5 hours, and we ran into a small hermitage, small temple, and the monks welcomed us, and then they started telling us about all the different hermits in the area. And so the next day, we went found some hermits. Then we went down the mountain back to Xi'an and started making plans to do a larger survey of the area. Maybe we spent a week there, and then we started traveling south, going to other parts of China that we thought might have hermits, and we did meet some in some areas, but nothing like the Zhongnan Mountains. And so we were up on one mountain in northern Fujian, and we came down to this little bus stop, and everybody was all excited there. It was June the 4th. No, it was June the 5th. The previous night, of course, was Tiananmen. And so everybody was. I'll tell you that month traveling in China was the happiest the Chinese people have ever been. We went to all these different places where just people who normally, the Chinese are rather reserved, not as much as the Japanese, but they're reserved. But they were like, the whole country was on holiday that month, May of '89. And then Tiananmen happened, and back they went to the grindstone. So me and Steve left China as soon as we could. It took us a couple of days to get a boat down the coast to Hong Kong, and then we flew back to Taiwan and waited a couple of months there. And Winston, was the owner of the world's biggest plastics company, and he was, as he said, he was in bed with the Chinese, and he couldn't give us any more money. He said because it might cause him trouble. So. Steve and I went back.
Why? I mean, nothing you were doing was controversial.
You don't know that.
Really?
We're dealing with people who. Well, first of all, we're everything we do in China is illegal because we're going into the mountains, which is illegal, and we're doing interviews We don't have any journalist credentials. We don't represent any organization that sanctions us. And the hermits, still are viewed by many people as people who are antisocial. And the Chinese don't like antisocial. At least the government doesn't like the idea of antisocial attitudes.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, Winston didn't want anything to do with the project anymore. And so we went back because I'd saved some money from my radio station days. And we went back and we just focused on the Zhongnan Mountains. And we spent about 2 months there. I came back, and that's when I started writing this book called Road to Heaven. And Steve went back to America, and then the following March I went back again because I had a rough draft of the book, and I saw there were some holes in the book. I needed more information. I needed to redo the interviews, and so I finished doing all the all that, and I came back and spent the summer writing the book. And then in the fall, I think it was the fall of that year, Gary Snyder and Carol came to Taiwan to do. One of the universities was publishing a book of a lot of Gary's works translated into Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
And so I showed Gary the manuscript, and he said, "Hey, Jack should publish this." And so he encouraged me to send it to Jack Shoemaker, which I did. And Jack had a press called North Point in those days.
Oh, right.
And so he gave me a contract. He gave me a contract. This was in '83. This is 93. He gave me a contract with North Point, but North Point closed a few months later when the person who was financing it died of cancer. And so Jack told me to keep the advance, which wasn't much. I think it was like maybe $1,500, $2,000. But his deputy editor had gone over to work on this other press called Mercury House, and so Mercury House published Road to Heaven.
Who was the deputy editor?
Tom Christensen.
All right.
And he afterwards he worked also at the San Francisco Art Museum too as an editor of their magazines.
Huh.
Anyway, that was how that book got published, but it got me into this mode of writing because I've been writing these programs, based on travel, and also but introducing Chinese culture. So, like I said, that book has made me, I paid off my mortgage last year. I'm drinking, like I say, $15 of wine. Can you imagine that?
This is outstanding. Well, you certainly deserve it.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I'm not giving it back.
That's great. Hey, I want to ask you something else.
Okay.
Can you tell us about your father?
My father, he was born in Arkansas, a little on a cotton farm, maybe about 20, 30 miles outside of Little Rock. I grew up with some cousins, and he had two sisters. Pearline was one of them, Pearline and Pauline. And he didn't want to pick cotton. Nobody wants to pick cotton. It's really painful with, those barbs on those cotton balls. Oh.
Yeah.
Anyway, he and some cousins formed a gang, and they started robbing banks. And I didn't know any of this when I was young. I didn't find out any of this until I came back from Taiwan once, and Pearline and Pauline said, we think there's something you need to know about your dad.
How old was he when he started robbing banks?
He was 19. He was 19, and he and his cousins, they worked their way up the Mississippi and up into Detroit, and the cops got wind of their next job and were waiting for them and killed everybody except my dad and this one cousin who was the getaway driver got away. That was Neil, cousin Neil, or Uncle Neil. And my dad got his kneecap shot off, so he had to go to prison. Anyway, it's really odd. I just mentioned this toward the end of my book called Zen Baggage. I just mentioned this that I found out from my aunt, and about 6 or 7 years ago, a Chinese Lama who's sent me an email. He said, we're waiting for your next book to come out, Bill, but are you aware of this story? And I didn't know what story he's talking about. He sent me a link to a story that some Chinese researcher had used this clue of mine that my father had robbed banks and done all this research and had photographs of all the banks and the police reports and all these stories in the Detroit Free Press and the Chicago Tribune of the gang and their exploits and the scams they had run. And anyway, my dad was able to get out. Even though it was a 20-year sentence, he was able to get out after 6 years. He became the warden's driver, according to this researcher. And so he was in good with the warden, got out after 6 years. And he went down to El Paso, where the getaway driver, his cousin Neil, had gone down to El Paso and was working in a hotel. And so he showed my dad how the hotel business works. And my dad, now that he was out of prison, his mother, my grandmother, gave him his third. They sold the cotton farm, and they moved up to Detroit so they could be close to him when he was in prison. So my grandmother gave Pearline and Pauline each a third, and my dad a third. And so my dad used his proceeds from the cotton farm sale to take out a lease on a hotel, and where you don't buy the building, I don't know.
Where?
It was probably I don't know where it began, but I assume it was in Texas someplace. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm guessing Fort Worth.
Oh, that's where I'm from.
One of his oldest friends. Well, my dad had a lawyer friend who was always his lawyer, so I figured his lawyer is probably from the town where he got started. It was George Kimball was the lawyer. Anyway,
I've heard that name. I think my mother knew George Kimball. I know that name.
Wow, that's amazing. Anyway, so my dad probably started this hotel business in Texas, and then he started,
And what was your father's name?
The same as mine, William Arnold Porter, but he always went by Arnold. So he was Arnold Porter, and he started this company called, what was it called? Continental Hotel System. And he started buying up leases on hotels and operating them, and training people, hiring people, training people to run them. And this was during the war, this is where it was actually like leading up to the war.
The Continental Hotel what?
System. I don't know if there's anything on the internet. There's probably
matter.
Something somewhere, but when I was born, he had 52 hotels in his system that he owned in the sense of owning the leases. He ran 52 hotels, and we bought this house when I grew up. He was just the previous, I think, year or so. We bought a house in Van Nuys, which just sold last. I think it was a couple of months ago. It finally sold for $6 million. I think it was $6 million because it occupied a large area in Van Nuys, sort of like an island. Anyway, so we lived,
But wait a minute, sold? Who owned it?
I think some doctor had bought it. We bought it when it was built. I think we moved into it in maybe 41. I was born in 43. My sister in 42. I think my wife, my mother and father bought the house in 41, I believe. 5251 Woodman Avenue. And it's in Van Nuys. I think it's in somebody else's border now, whatever's next to Van Nuys. Sherman Oaks, maybe. Anyway, so my father became really wealthy, and had all this money, and he was into politics. He liked to, and he was into the Democratic Party fundraising thing, and so he knew all the governors, and I remember once when we went to private schools, and once I think I was in the fourth grade, and one day I was crying. They sent us to boarding schools, which is really a terrible thing to do to kids, but that's what it was. My parents were rich. They had all this money. They wanted to spend it. So kids, just get in the way. So one day I remember I was crying, and I went to the school office, and I wanted to talk to my dad. And I said, "Where's your dad?" I said, "Well, he's out shooting dove with the governor." And so they said, "Well, which governor?" I said, "I don't know." And so, because he was friends with Pat Brown, and also the governor of Arizona, and Vale Pittman was the governor of Nevada. So we finally tracked him down that day. He's out shooting dove with Vale Pittman. So he used to hang out with all these political people. And then in the mid '50s, he wanted to get out of L.A. and we moved up to northern Idaho, and we bought Bing Crosby's home, because Bing had just the previous year got an annulment from the Pope, and so there were a lot of paparazzi bugging him, and so he moved across this lake. It's called Hayden Lake, and he moved across the lake so he could have a more secluded place. And we bought this place on this golf course where he had lived. It was sort of his summer home. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a mansion or anything like that. It was just, because he was from Spokane. That's where he really lived. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so we moved up there, and my dad also took out a lease on a 3,000-acre ranch up in north of there, outside of Bonner's Ferry, and we just started hunting and fishing, hanging out up there. That's what he did, and then he ran his hotel business out of an office in Coeur d'Alene, and did a lot of traveling around. But he did a lot of fundraising. The Kennedys would come by. Jack, I don't think ever came to our house. Just Bobby and Teddy, because he'd have these big fundraising things for the Democratic Party.
Wow.
One of his closest friends was somebody he'd gotten into politics named Frank Church, who was a lawyer down in Boise.
Yeah.
And so he was sort of like the chief fundraiser for the Democratic Party in the state of Idaho. He was also, if I understand this right, and again, I don't know, sometimes my father would talk about things that were not necessarily true, but he was, I believe, the co-chair of Kennedy's re-election campaign for the 11 Western states. And so when Kennedy won, my dad and mom went to the inaugural ball. In fact, I have in the basement this huge painting that my dad had made of my mom in this fancy French gown that she wore to the inaugural ball. So he was sort of, wheeling and dealing and making money and hanging out in the political realm. But, he was just a country boy. He had no education to speak of, but he knew how to do things. And he was a personality. When he walked in a room, everybody noticed him. He was, about 6'2", but he always wore a Stetson hat, cowboy boots. All the suits were Western style suits, fancy Western. So one of his best friends was Gene Autry.
Oh, wow.
He was anyway, but eventually he and my mom divorced, and he wouldn't give her anything, and she wouldn't have any of that, and so they ended up spending 14 years in different state courts throughout the West, wherever my dad had a hotel, and so they both ended up broke. And so my dad went bankrupt, and it's what happens in business. Because sometimes these businesses, especially where you own leases, they can be like a house of cards.
Yeah.
And so what would happen when you litigate, when the ownership is unclear, the court will appoint a receiver. Somebody's going to run your hotel who knows nothing about the hotel business. So all of these businesses just went broke, and so my dad ended up dying bankrupt.
Well, that was really not smart of him not to just be generous with your mother. I mean, what led to that?
Oh, just personality. He drank a lot. I mean, that was basically the cause for the divorce, because he would drink a lot, and I'd say once a month he would beat her.
Oh,
and we wondered why. Me and my brother and sister wondered why it took her so long to see the light, and to divorce him. But she finally did, and so that's what precipitated that. And he was, like a lot of men from his era. Women didn't have any say, and weren't expected to voice, their what shall we say, have a vision of life, of their life.
Yeah.
Anyway, he wouldn't accept the fact that she wanted something from him, and of course that was his own undoing.
Yeah.
So anyway, I by the time I was about 15 or so, we didn't have any more money when I was going to boarding schools. Then George Kimball was paying for me to go to go to boarding school in my last couple of years. I went to this boarding school up in Atherton, called Menlo School for Boys. Whereas when I was in L.A. in Hollywood, going to the Black Fox Military Institute, my roommate's father was the mayor of Tijuana, and we shared a bathroom with the sons of the presidents of Mexico and Costa Rica. It was all these dictators' kids, and movie stars kids. Whereas up in the Bay Area, it was all old money. Like my roommate's grandfather owned Time magazine. It was sort of like that sort of stuff. It was loose money.
Luce, yeah, Henry Luce. Henry and
Yeah,
Claire Luce.
This was one of his grandsons. It was my roommate at Menlo. Anyway,
wow,
and that was all paid for. My dad already didn't have any money anymore, and George was paying for my education. And then of course I went off to college, flunked out of 3 colleges, and went in the Army, and we're back where we started. I've got to go and water the plants, David.
Just tell me one thing. Yeah, this is all good. This is enough, but I just want to hear a little bit about your mother.
My mother, she grew up in northern Michigan in the Upper Peninsula, the Keweenaw Peninsula, a little town called Calumet, an old copper town that had gone belly up. And she got a degree in nursing, and became a nurse. And then she applied to become part of the first class of stewardesses for American Airlines. Oh. And so she was one of the first 6 stewardesses for American Airlines.
Back to Fort Worth.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where the school was, in Arlington, right between Fort Worth and Dallas.
And that was their headquarters, Fort Worth.
Yeah.
So she started. That's where she obviously met my dad. I've never heard any stories because they never talked about it. But anyway, they got married. So she was a nurse. So she was always very, shall we say, we drank a lot of castor oil. I remember as kids, and milk of magnesia.
Oh no!
Because yes, milk of magnesia and castor oil, all the time, which obviously did us a lot of good. But that's the last thing you want going through your system when you're a kid.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. And what was her name?
Gladys Kranz, Krans, Gladys Ethel Kranz. And,
wow. Wow. All right. Well, just would you, how would you like to conclude the phone chat we're having?
Well, it's been good talking with you, David. And maybe I just felt like you asked the questions, and so I've been answering them, and you didn't say stop, so I've just been rambling.
Oh,
but
this is great. This is great.
Well,
it's
anyway,
been
it's been great chatting with you. And,
yeah, I loved it all.
And I will be giving this phone to Silas.
Yeah.
Silas Hoadley will have this phone tomorrow, and then it'll be up to him to answer when you call, and I'll tell him at 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock. Okay. Hey, thanks a lot, Bill. Go water the plants. That was terrific. I really appreciate
I'm
it.
going to open up that $15 bottle of wine too.
Yeah. Hey, come to Bali. We got a guest room.
Yeah, well, right now I can't go anywhere.
Yeah. I know it's you can't get in here now. In fact, Katrinka just came from Oregon, band in Oregon, and she was there for over 4 months. She couldn't get back here, and she's got a resident visa. It was just no flights.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be flying again someday, just not anytime soon.
All right. All right. Very good. Well, thanks for everything. Take care. Stay young. And bye-bye. So thanks a lot, Bill Porter, aka Red Pine, for joining us for today's phone chat. And thank you, dear listener, for being here to keep us company. If you feel so moved and want to help us keep chugging along, we urge you to go to the homepage of cuke.com, cuke.com, and there's a donate button up near the top and near the bottom. You hit that, you go to the donate page, and there's a button on Cuke Audio Podcast too, like that. And then you go to the donate page, and that shows you how to send a check or make a PayPal donation or become a PayPal subscriber for as little as $1 a month. It's easy to do and is a refreshing and rewarding experience, and we'd greatly appreciate it. So, until next time, this is DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Dogga Bandita and Feline Cuchita and dear lovely Katrinka, wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.